Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our second meeting at Kilmarsh Sports Centre. As I said when we met in June, many things had to change when we had to work virtually, and which I would like to carry forward now that we are meeting physically. The more structured approach worked well at our last meeting, and I suggest we follow a similar approach this time. But before we begin, I would be grateful if the Principal Clerk could explain how the meeting will run and what we need to do and which members are here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So just a few health and safety announcements for today. Welcome to Kilmarsh and apologies to everybody for the late change of venue. We do have social distancing in operation here on site today and hand sanitizer around the room for your use. If you've got any concerns or requirements, please indicate it to a member of the staff and we will help to assist you. We're not expecting a fire alarm today during the course of the meeting. Therefore, if one does sound, that we will be treating it as a true alert and we'll be exiting via the two doors here and heading out round to the car park. As the Chair requested, I would just like to announce which members are present here with us today. We have Councillor Armitage, Councillor Elliott, Councillor Jones, Councillor Powell, Councillor Ridgway, Councillor Rouse, Councillor Ruff, Councillor Ancliffe and Councillor Dayton. And also here today with us we have members of the planning team, Graham, Emily and Adrian, Jim Fieldsend, our legal advisor, and members of the governance team who will be here today to support. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda are apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We've got apologies for absence today from Councillor Heather Liggett, who's substituted today by Councillor Pat Ancliffe, and apologies also from Councillor Mark Foster, who is substituted today by Councillor Lillian Dayton.
There's also apologies from Roger Hall. Are there any other apologies?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Second item on the agenda is declaration of interests. Members are requested to declare the existence and nature of any disposable pecuniary interest and or other interests not already on their register of interests in any item on the agenda and withdraw from the meeting at the appropriate time. Have we received any declarations in advance?
None received in advance, Chair.
No. Do any members have a declaration of interest?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Item 3, minutes of the last meeting. We now have the minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday the 29th of June 2021. Are we all happy that they are a correct record?
Move it.
I have a mover and a seconder. The mover is Councillor Ancliffe and the seconder is Councillor Armitage. All those in favour? Thank you. Any abstentions? Any against? The motion's carried. Thank you, members. That moves us on to our main business for today. We have 5 applications and 1 provisional tree preservation order to consider. As you can see, each of these has its own report marked as agenda items 4 to 9. I am happy with this and intend to consider them in that order. Before we do this, I would like the clerk to explain for the benefit of members, speakers and the public, and those who will listen to the audio recording that will be made about how we will deal with the applications and the provisional TPO.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is the procedure for considering applications at the meeting. We will consider the 4 applications in the order that they are set out on the agenda, although there will be a break during the proceedings. The Chair will introduce the application, then ask the planning officers to refer members to any late comments or updates received since the agenda was issued. The late items agenda supplement has been published on the Council's website and hard copies have been circulated to you. The planning officers will then give a brief presentation, setting out the application plans and photographs from the site. Members have received hard copies of this, which they are asked to follow. After this, the Chair will ask each of the speakers, any ward members first, followed by objectors, then the applicant or their agent, to speak to the committee. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to put forward their views. There will be a reminder given by the clerk when 30 seconds remain. At the end of the speaker's 3 minutes, members of the committee will have an opportunity to ask the speakers questions, if necessary, to clarify any points they have made. When we have heard from all the speakers on an application, the Chair will open up the meeting for debate by the committee and to termination by a vote. The votes will be taken by a roll call. A note for the speakers. Once the application you've come to speak on has been dealt with, you may leave the meeting. If you choose to remain, then please be aware that you will not be allowed to participate further from that point. As you are aware, this meeting is being recorded, and this recording will be placed on the Council's website. Please note that others may choose to copy this from the internet. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll move on to the first application, which is item 4, which is NED/21/00393/ outline permission for Sherland. But before we move on to that, in line with our normal practice, I'm going to ask the planning officers to tell us about any late comments, reports that have been produced, and for the planning manager to give a brief presentation showing any photos and plans of the site. These are in the pack that has been circulated to you. Therefore, I will allow the officers to complete their presentation. I ask members to reserve any points of order or questions about the process until the end. There will be plenty of time for questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just firstly, may I refer members to the late representations report that was emailed out to them yesterday afternoon. The paper version, Chair, that's before all members today was printed off before that report was completed, and we got a very late representation in, so it doesn't contain that. So for clarity, Chair, I'm just going to read the summation of that other representation, which members will have seen in electronic form but isn't in the paper form before you this afternoon. And in effect, it's from Timothy Slack, who lives at 15 Northfield, and he sets out that currently Northfield is a private cul-de-sac offering its residents a peaceful community with no issues of crime. It already has a sufficient foot entry and exit point where it meets Town End. There is no need for a footpath link from Birkenstyle Lane into the site or vice versa, and it can therefore be considered unnecessary, thereby failing the test for a condition as per the submission of the agent Charlotte Stainton. He goes on to reiterate comments made by Keith Beswick of Derbyshire Police Chair, who has commented that narrow links emerging into semi-private space are a known generator of nuisance problems for adjacent houses. Footpaths are such narrow links. Given the issues arising from many footpaths elsewhere, why take such risk when none persists at present and there is no demonstrable reason to install the proposed footpath? And he concludes, for the reasons documented in this memo, he supports the application to remove footpath link and as contained within condition 28. Just in terms of the detailing, Chair, it's an application, as you have just outlined, to remove a footpath link as required by condition 28 of planning consent NED 12-00718/OL. The site visit yesterday, Chair, noted a range of views of the site of Birkenstyle Lane and Town End, but we have included a few photographs showing that in the presentation pack that members do have. The approved scheme for the site, Chair, required a link from the development to Birkenstyle Lane for the reason that it was in the interest of pedestrian safety, and therefore members will need to take that into account in considering the application. Officer's view, Chair, is that it would, however, lead to a narrow route bounded by high fencing. There was no right-of-way through the site previously, and as you just heard, the designing out crime officer, Mr. Beswick, supports the application to remove the link. Officers consider a suitable alternative is available along Town End and Birkenstyle Lane and conclude that the harm likely to result from retaining the link is not outweighed by any benefits. Just in terms of the photographs in the presentation, Chair. The first one, as is customary, shows the site hatched in orange. It's shown on there as partially developed. The second slide shows the site outlined in red, and you can make out the link to the west to Town End, and then the link to the north to Birkenstyle Lane. And there follows a location plan of the scheme as approved and as developed now out. And again, you can see the vehicular access onto Town End, and then the link of the site to Birkenstyle Lane at the north of the site, next to number 10, between it and number 18. And then, Chair, just to move on, the next slide shows the development as approved, showing that footpath link in front of one of the properties and then linking through the area of green space towards Birkenstyle Lane. It's that link and the requirement for that link that the application seeks to remove. All of the elements of the application would remain unaltered. And then finally, Chair, as I say, there are a small number of photographs showing the details of the application. The first photograph shows the entrance into the site from Birkenstyle Lane that the footpath link would go into. So it's between the two houses, as you can see there, and then accessing past the new property in the middle distance. Further to that, Chair, the next photograph shows the view of the link provision westwards along Birkenstyle Lane. And then we move on to some photographs of Town End, and officers have put those into the presentation, Chair, just to outline that there is an alternative route along Birkenstyle Lane and Town End that connects the 2 points of the site. And moving on, Chair, the next slide is of the site entrance, and then further to that into the site. And then the final 2 slides show where the footpath link would go along a private drive towards the timber fence in the middle distance. And then the final slide, Chair, shows a close-up of that, showing where the footpath link would go through the front of the property that's been built, and then accessing onto Birkenstyle Lane between the 2 properties, again in the middle distance where there's a tree or large bush just at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm now going to invite the speakers to address the committee. As the clerk explained, they will each have 3 minutes to get over their points. They will be informed when 30 seconds remain. As members, you can ask them to clarify any matters that have been raised, but remember your question should only relate to the points which you have already made. Our speakers are here today with us, and they will address us from the desk. Having said that, one of the speakers couldn't arrive today because of the late change of venue and her work commitments, but the clerk is going to read out the text.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is from Anne Brown, Chair of Shirland and Higham Parish Council, and a statement is to begin. All our parish councillors feel very strongly about this footpath and that it should remain. There are concerns that if Condition 28 is removed, the developer will build additional properties in the open space. Although a footpath across the front garden of number 3 is not ideal, the developer was well aware of this condition that was agreed regarding the footpath in the 2012 application decision. The idea of a footpath to Birkenstyle Lane arose from the public consultation. The developer's description said that a new public footpath will be provided linking the site to Birkenstyle Lane. This will provide people living on the development and on Town End a quick and easy route to the bus stop on Birkenstyle Lane and to the facilities at Stone Broom. This footpath is very well used and is an important link for the elderly residents in nearby School Close. The police report that Charlton Stainton is relying on as evidence is dated 21st of June 2016, well before the landscaping and driveways were put in. This condition was included for very good reasons and should not be removed. Thank you, Chair. That's the end of the statement.
Thank you. Does anyone want any clarification on the text? No, thank you. I have one other speaker, and is speaking on behalf of the applicant, Lee Evans. Mr Evans, if you'd like to take the desk. If you'd like to confirm your name, and then you have 3 minutes.
Lee Evans. Thank you. My name is Lee Evans. My company built this small development of 14 homes, and my wife and I have now chosen to live in one of them as part of the Shirland community. We are not a big developer from outside the area trying to get away with a planning condition. I was always concerned about the issues associated with the provision of the new link, and now the house at Plot 3 is being constructed, we are even more concerned about the potential impacts. The new link would create a long, narrow path with 6-foot fencing to each side, and therefore there would be very limited natural surveillance. This would enable people to loiter unseen at the side of the existing house at 18 Birkenstyle Lane, as well as at the side of the garden associated with Plot 3. This is a serious potential security and antisocial behaviour problem. The proposed footpath link serves no useful purpose. You may have seen a plan submitted by a local resident which shows that the length of the route from Birkenstyle Lane to Town End would actually be longer. One of the main things I want to explain today is that there seems to be some confusion about this path. This is not an existing footpath or right-of-way that we are trying to close. We think the objectors are confusing another permissive footpath in the area with the proposed link. There have been comments that the footpath has been used for hundreds of years, which can't be true when it hasn't even been constructed. Although not relevant to this application, I want to confirm for the record that the permissive footpath that I think is being referred to in the objections was closed after Plot 8 was sold. As the builder, I maintained access all of the time. In summary, this is not an existing public footpath. It is only a proposed tarmac link between 2 fences from my development to the road. It would serve no useful purpose to the existing residents of Shirland. There is simply no need for this footpath link. The footpath link is likely to cause antisocial behaviour issues for the existing Shirland residents as well as the residents in the new homes. The crime prevention officer at the police has given you strong advice that this footpath should not be built. We ask you please to agree with your officer recommendation and let us complete the development without this unnecessary link. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, do you have any questions to clarify? Councillor Powell?
Hello, Mr Evans. Is the development complete now?
Virtually, apart from final surfacing of the road.
Yeah, it's just that I get the feeling that we've been backed into a corner here because there doesn't seem to be any attempt made in the stages that you've completed to actually do anything about the footpath. And I would have thought that, bearing in mind it was a condition originally, you would have borne that in mind when you were doing it. I also find it surprising that you didn't realise it was going to be difficult until one of the houses was complete. Your comments, please.
I think we did realise that it was going to be an issue. The footpath link was actually added in the outline application. We did a reserve matters application where we were unable to remove it at that point. I take on board the comments that it's taken some time. I think that's purely down to resource and time. As a small company, you know, I'm sort of running the business on my own, so I don't think there's anything Machiavellian about it. It's just timing.
Thank you.
Councillor Ancliffe? Councillor Armitage.
Thank you, Chair. I must agree with my colleague. You knew about Condition 28 when you started the thing, and surely when you put the application in to start with, wouldn't it have been better to not have Condition 28 in at the time, or was it just apply mainly to get planning permission? And bearing in mind, you mentioned unsociable things and the police and what have you, but there's a police house just opposite. I mean, you know, there are police nice and near to stop antisocial behaviour. Don't you agree?
Well, actually, the police house was closed a few decades ago. It's now a shop. With regard to the planning permission, I repeat that We didn't put the outline application in. We only did a reserve matters application, and there's no legal way that a condition can be removed from the outline application via the reserve matters. So we couldn't actually do it at the time anyway.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Councillor Elliott.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the map, is it not possible to make that footpath wider, and does it have to be hemmed in with 6-foot fence panels?
I suppose it could be, yeah.
Because I'm assuming that you're saying the antisocial behaviour is because they could loiter within that 6-foot fence panel in a narrow void. It doesn't have to be a narrow void looking at it.
I don't think the fact that it's narrow is the issue. I think the fact that you're not going to get natural surveillance. I mean, I'm not an expert on it. We're only just taking what the police have told us.
Any further questions? No, thank you. You now have the opportunity to put questions to the planning manager and any other officers about the application. Again, I would like to keep this part of our proceedings focused on getting clarity about any points that you are not sure of. Once we have done this, we can then have our discussion about the application based on what we have all heard and read. I would be grateful if you could not move any motions at this stage. Thank you. Are there any questions for the planning officers? Councillor Al?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, question to the planning manager, really. There seems to be some dispute about whether this footpath ever existed. And it's a pity that the representative from the parish council couldn't be here to answer questions on the assertion that it is well used. I'm in some difficulty here, because if it doesn't exist, how can it be well used? I just am in a dilemma about it, so any comment would be welcome, Mr. Kirkham.
All I can advise members, Chair, is that there is no formal right-of-way through the site. So if there were permissions to use the land to gain access between Town End and Birkenstyle Lane, it was never enshrined as a formal public right-of-way. So I presume it was permissive or allowed by any previous owners, if it existed at all. I can't advise any further than that, Chair, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Councillor Armitage?
Yes, Adrian. I mean, why was condition 28 put on then in the first place, and why was it allowed?
Condition 28 was placed on the outline application. As I mentioned in the introduction, Chair, it was placed on in the interests of pedestrian safety. It was undertaken in 2012 or thereabouts, so it is some time ago, so I can't recall the exact detailing of that, but the application was approved with that condition, requiring the footpath link in the interests of pedestrian safety. So that is, I'm presuming in our advice to you, that's the issue that you need to consider, whether or not it is a requirement for the link to be retained to allow appropriate access to and from Birkenstyle Lane, to and from Town End from the development, but also to allow access around the site. Otherwise, is that an acceptable form of alternative? And of course, you've also got the issue of as well, does the design of the development, is that deteriorated by not having the link? So I think they're the two issues, Chair, that members need to take into account. And as officers, the view that we've set out is that there is an acceptable alternative link, potentially shorter for those who want to travel along Birkenstyle Lane and Town End between the two entrance points. So that's in effect led to our recommendation to members, along with the advice that Mr. Beswick's given to us in terms of the designing out crime officer comments.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott?
Yeah, good question for Adrian. Adrian, I'm sort of, this is in addition to what Councillor Armitage has just asked. If there's never been a footpath there and the section 28 was sat there, was that just sat there so there was a footpath, should we call it a footpath or not? Was it just sat there while the site was being developed as an accessible route through? Because it just, for me, it just seems like a shortcut and nothing more.
As I say, the negotiation that was undertaken at the outline application is almost 10 years ago, so I can't recall the exact detailing, but it would be our normal process and our normal stance to seek to ensure that new development is accessible. So there is access through and to other rights of way, and in this instance, having that access onto Birkenstyle Lane would have ticked one of those boxes, allowing access from the development to Birkenstyle Lane, therefore meaning that anyone wanting to access from the development to Birkenstyle Lane doesn't have to go on the route around.
And would we have just put that on as a temporary measure? Because you know, if you put a load of slabs down round somebody's house, somebody will cut across the grass. Is it just that kind of issue?
No, it was put on as a condition requiring that link. So not as a temporary measure.
Are there any further questions? No? Thank you, Adrian. This leads us on to the final part of the process, our discussion about what we've heard, what we think, and what we want to decide. But before going any further, I would just like the clerk to remind us about motions.
Thank you, Chair. Please bear in mind, members, that a motion must be moved and seconded before a vote is taken. If an amendment to a motion is moved and seconded, then that amendment will be voted on first. If a motion is to be moved which goes against officer recommendations, then the member who has moved the motion must give the reasons for doing so. The reasons for moving a motion against officer recommendations should comprise the relevant planning issues and be supported by evidence as necessary. If a motion to reject officer recommendations fails, or in other words, it is not passed, that doesn't mean to say that the recommendations are automatically approved. Rather, you will need to take a positive decision through a further motion in favour of the recommendations or another course of action. This will need to be approved by the committee through another vote. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'd like to open the floor for debate. Again, as the clerk has just reminded us, could you please refrain from moving any motions until we have concluded any discussion? Thank you. Does anyone want to open the floor? Councillor Powell?
As I said earlier, I think we've been backed into a corner here. I'm very disappointed that no action towards putting in a footpath has been taken and that the houses have been built. However, in a practical sense, I don't think we have much of a choice. I think we should also think about the residents who now live there. When the time comes to move a motion, I will be supporting officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Any other comment? No? I'll open the floor for a motion to be put in place. Councillor Powell?
Move officer's recommendation, Chair.
I'd like to second it. Can we have a show of hands? Oh no, Nikki, we have to have a roll call, don't we?
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As seems to be custom for this authority, we'll take a recorded vote style roll call, starting with alphabetic reverse. Could you clearly state for, against or abstain for the motion put? Councillor Ruff?
For.
Councillor Rouse?
For.
Councillor Ridgway?
For.
Councillor Powell?
For.
Councillor Jones? For. Councillor Elliott?
For.
Councillor Dayton?
For.
Councillor Armitage?
For.
Councillor Ancliffe?
For.
Chair, with 9 votes for, 0 against, 0 abstentions, it's carried.
Thank you, members. The motion's been carried. We can move on to the second application for the afternoon. It's application 21 / oh no, I'm reading the same one out again, aren't I? Sorry. I need to check the page. 42. I'm going to go through that again. Okay. We're now on application 21 / 00191 / FL. This is an application for the construction of 2 agricultural buildings, again in Shurland.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, may I confirm that no late reps have been received on this application. In terms of the detailing, this is a full application for the construction of 2 agricultural buildings at land to the north-east of Main Road, Shurland. Members of the Planning Committee attended a virtual site visit of the site where we saw a range of photos. officers consider that the proposal would be for an operation of a use appropriate to its countryside location. The scale, design and siting of the building is considered to be in keeping with the character and appearance of the surrounding countryside, which would preserve the setting of the listed building on site. The proposed development would not result in any adverse detrimental impacts upon the privacy and amenity of nearby residential properties or neighbouring land uses, nor would it lead to an adverse impact upon highway safety. As you can see in the pack chair, this plan illustrates the site shaded in orange. As you can see, the site is located to the east of Main Road and is sited outside of the defined settlement development limit of Shirland and is considered a countryside location. On the next slide, the application field and access is edged in red and the applicant's land holding is edged in blue. This next slide shows the proposed block plan. The two agricultural buildings would be sited within close proximity to one another within the southwest corner of the field. Moving on, this is an elevation and floor plan illustrating building 1, which will be used for the storage of agricultural machinery and implements. This next slide illustrates the elevation and floor plan for building 2, which will be used for the storage of hay and the shelter of livestock. The next slides are key photos taken from the committee site visit, which members attended yesterday. I've included these as a refresher for members. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to invite the speakers, but again, the speaker that we had from the Parish Council couldn't attend, so I'm going to ask the clerk to read her text.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, this is the text from Councillor Anne Brown. The proposed buildings are not in keeping with the nature of the listed building. There are also concerns about the height of the eaves. We are very concerned regarding what the buildings are to be used for. In particular, the one stated for livestock. This is too close to the existing buildings and may lead to smells, problems with flies, etc. Will there be a stipulation that the buildings can only be used for agricultural purposes? As we have seen in the past, that an application states one thing, then once the buildings are built, are used for totally different purposes. There also is a watercourse in close proximity to this site, which causes us concerns. I hope that you will take our points raised into serious consideration, making your decision regarding this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Does anyone have any clarification for the clerk? No? Thank you. I will then hand over to any questions to the planning officer. Councillor Armitage?
Yeah, could you actually see that there was a need for this? I mean, is there a holding number on this particular area?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, there is an agricultural holding number on the site. When I visited the site, there was a more equestrian feel. That's because the previous owners did use it for that. However, the current applicant is proposing to use it for agricultural purposes.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? I'd just like to raise one, and this is for the officers, probably Adrian. If this application was to be passed, Adrian, could we put on a condition that if it was no longer used as agricultural use, the buildings had to be demolished?
If you felt, Chair, that without that condition the development wasn't acceptable, then you could. It's not a condition that I've come across before, because it does require significant, it would have a significant impact on the applicant if he or she erected the buildings and then had to have them removed. And so I would ask you to think carefully about whether the development is otherwise acceptable without it. I think that's the first issue. But if you felt that it needed that condition on to give you absolute surety that the buildings would be used for agriculture, and without that you wouldn't be of a mind to grant your consent, then yes, you could if you felt it met the necessary conditions to provide an acceptable form of development. The buildings, as you'll be aware, Chair, should only be used for agricultural purposes. Should you grant consent, any other use would require planning consent.
Thank you. Any other questions to Councillor Armitage?
Yeah, it said in the proposal that the one building is to be used for a hay barn, and in my experience, if you put hay in a building of this design, it'll set on fire basically through internal combustion because there's no ventilation, and you're going to have a roller shutter door, and I don't think the design is suitable for what it's said it's going to be used for, quite frankly.
Chair, if I may, just very briefly, and Emily will correct me if I'm wrong here, Chair, but I believe that the building with the roller shutter doors is to be used to store the equipment, and the building with the front opening is proposed to be used for the hay storage, which I think is the point that Councillor Armitage has made. I'm afraid I'm no expert on the combustibility of hay, but I think that would perhaps address the point that Councillor Armitage made, Chair.
Well, there's no roller shutter, there's no shutters on the hay store.
That's correct, Councillor. So the second building is open-fronted on one side.
Right, so it'll be open.
Say that again, sorry.
It'll be an open building.
Yes, that's correct.
Right.
Yes, so building one would be for the implements and machinery, and that would have the roller shutters, and then the building two would be open-sided, and that would be for the livestock and hay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any further questions? No, thank you. I'll open the floor for debate. Any comment? No. I'll move it for a motion then.
Councillor Ridgway, Chair.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Ridgway.
Yeah, I just feel that I agree with your comment, Chair, that if we do approve this, that we put a condition on that it stays for what it is, because what was read out by one of the objectors, I totally agree. We have had planning here before that we've agreed to be one thing and has been turned into something different. So I think if we do approve this, I think we need to set very strong conditions.
Thank you. Is there a motion on the floor?
Move officer's recommendation, Chair.
Thank you.
Second it, Chair.
Thank you.
With conditions.
That's the point I was just seeking clarity on, Chair. The comment that Councillor Ridgway mentioned was, I think, in response to your question to me, Chair, and we just need to be clear if members are minded to grant permission, whether it's in addition to a further condition that requires the buildings to be demolished if they are no longer used for agriculture. And if that's the case, Chair, I'd ask that if members are minded to grant consent with that included, that the final wording of that is finalised with yourself. Powers delegated to me to add that, but in consultation with yourself, Chair.
Adrian, through the Chair, I'm quite happy that the conditions are on that it remains nothing other than agricultural. If the Chair would like to add the condition that it's demolished, fine.
Thank you. Okay.
We just need clarity on that point, Chair, whether that condition goes on or not. And I'm not sure, Councillor Elliott, whether you're asking that the...
As far as I'm concerned, Adrian, we put the condition on that it will always remain agricultural. If the Chair would like to add to that anything to embellish that, that's fine.
Thank you. We can sort that out then, Adrian.
Just to be clear then, Chair, members are be voting to approve the application in accordance with the set out conditions, with an additional condition that requires the buildings to be demolished should they no longer be used for agricultural purposes.
Is everyone happy with that?
Do you need that condition, Chair?
Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, can we just be clear then who moved and seconded that motion?
I moved it, Chair.
I second it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, members. Okay.
Chair, happy for me to do the vote?
Oh, yes. Sorry, I'm ahead of myself.
No.
We'll now take the vote.
Thank you. Members could clearly indicate for, against or abstain. Councillor Ruff.
For.
Councillor Rouse.
For.
Councillor Ridgway.
For.
Councillor Powell.
For.
Councillor Jones.
For.
Councillor Elliott.
For.
Councillor Dayton.
For.
Councillor Armitage.
For.
And Councillor Ancliffe.
For.
That's all in favour, Chair. Carried.
Thank you. The motion's been carried. We'll move on to the third application, and then after that I shall say we'll have a short break. Thank you. This application is reference number 21//00344/FLH, and this is a proposed loft conversion with 2 front dormers, 1 rear dormer and hips covered to gables, single-storey rear extension at 95 Windsor Drive. Thank you. Over to the Planning Officer.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just first of all, to refer members to the late representations that were emailed out yesterday afternoon. In this instance, Chair, the late reps that's referred to does appear in the hard copy, so I don't intend to make further reference to it. Members will, I'm sure, have already read that. But in terms of the application, Chair, it's an application seeking to add rear and roof extensions to a property that's currently a bungalow at Wingerworth. So the applicant in this instance is seeking to raise the height of the roof apex and add both front and rear dormers, and also to add a single-storey rear extension. The site, Chair, sits between a row of 2-storey properties and an extended bungalow, and the bungalow itself is currently brick built. The property would be raised by 1 metre. As I say, the roof would be raised by 1 metre, but following receipt of amended plans, both front and rear dormers would be offset from the side of the roof that abuts with the next door bungalow. As noted at the virtual site visit yesterday, Chair, the issues needing to be considered are the issue of the design of the extension and its impact on the amenity and the privacy of the next door neighbours. Just to go through the slides, Chair, in order, the first slide again outlines the application site in orange, and then over the page the site as is customary outlined in red, and then further to that, Chair, the next slide shows the bungalow in its current form, and you can see on the rear there is currently a conservatory and additional element already on the rear there. And just turning the page, Chair, now shows what's proposed. So there are 2 dormers proposed on the front elevation, and then the side elevations show the raising of the roof apex by the 1 metre that I've referred to, and then the front and rear dormers and the rear extension. Just in the bottom left of that slide, Chair, as we saw yesterday, you can see the revised plan showing the rear dormer set away from the edge of the property and set down by the 700mm from the apex of the roof. You can also see, Chair, the various windows that are referred to in the report. The one nearest to the next door property is proposed as a bedroom, and then there's a bathroom, a landing area, another bathroom, and then the final one, which is the 3-paned window, is a further bedroom. The next slide just shows the details on plan form and in section form. And then in terms of the photographs, Chair, the application bungalow is the bungalow on the left-hand side of that photograph, and you can see the next door property with the 2 existing front gables, and you can just make out the secondary kitchen window that we discussed at site visits yesterday, providing the secondary light to the kitchen, which has other windows to the rear and rear side. Then in terms of the street scene, Chair, the next slide shows the 2-storey properties that lie next door to the application property, which is to the right of the photograph. And then the next slide shows what was originally proposed in the top left, which was boarding, whereas now the materials to be used to finish off the roof are render. And then finally, Chair, again, as we saw yesterday, the next slide shows on the right-hand side the application property, and then on the left of that, the next door property, which is set down at a lower level than the application property. And then again, Chair, on the left-hand side, the left-hand wall is of the neighbouring property, and again you can see the difference in levels with the level of the next door bungalow down at the level where the bins are stored. And then finally, Chair, the final slide shows seeks to show the issue of privacy and overlooking, and the concerns of the next door neighbour is in relation to the new windows that would be installed in the roof elevation, which is the top of that slide, so where the ladder is accessing. And so the end of the property would become a gable rather than a hip, and set in from there would be the new box dormer with the windows. And the issue that we've set out as officers in the report is that there would be some element of limited looking into the garden next door, but that would be offset by the garage, the existing extension, and of course by the angle, and that's the view that we've set out as officers in the report, Chair.
Thank you. I shall now ask the speakers to come, and the first speaker is an objector, and Mr. Tagg. Mr. Tagg, could you just confirm your name, and then you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, it's Mark Tagg. Okay. I strongly disagree that this development is acceptable, even taking account of the slight alterations, and it will be, in effect, like a 2-storey flat roof house with 3 unobscured windows angled towards our garden. This will severely affect our privacy, and the height in real times will severely affect the availability of light through our kitchen window. Size. This at the rear will be a large box-like structure and undeniably will tower 6.4 metres, 21 feet above our ground level, and the corner sits only 18 inches from our property. I arrive at 6.4 metres from the 5-metre height of the building, and the fact that my ground level is 1.4 metres lower than the development. This is contrary to the stated figure of 0.73 metres in the report. In the officer's measurement, no consideration of the 9 courses of brick to damp course was undertaken. If you do, the development is actually 1.4 metres higher, not just 0.73. A slightly misleading statement, 0.7.5 in the report. This consequently will have an increased effect on the light into my kitchen and privacy on my garden. 0.7.5 states the applicant's property is now reduced to a level officers consider acceptable. Is it still acceptable if the true height, which in real terms is almost 3/4 of a metre higher than the height at which the officers base their view? Privacy. 2 of the windows are of concern, the staircase window and in particular the nearest bedroom window, which looks over approximately 80% of my garden at a close distance and angles towards it. 0.5.7. The agent states it is not possible to see on the neighbour's rear garden, a statement that is completely false. It's a point that has been included in the report, but the officers know it is incorrect. Mr. Kirkham has stood on my garden and viewed my concerns, in fact saying, "How would you feel, Mr. Tagg, if the nearest bedroom window was obscured and open towards you?" I would also like to point out that I submitted a number of photographs from my garden showing my concerns and the view of the development property. None have been included in this report. 0.7.12. It states that because the bedroom window...
30 seconds remain.
Sorry?
30 seconds remain.
Okay. It states that because the bedroom windows now sit lower, views will now be considered by officers acceptable. This is irrelevant because the height of the bedroom floor is not being lowered. If the floor isn't lowered, then anyone looking out and affecting my privacy will have the same view at the same height as before. So from a privacy aspect, nothing has changed. As the view of my garden is actually the same, is this still considered acceptable by the officers?
That's time, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tagg. Your time is up.
Okay.
Are there any questions for the speaker? Councillor Elliott?
Thank you, Chair. I assume yours is the bungalow below, the lower one?
That's correct.
And the Velux, is that your kitchen? Is that feeding light to your kitchen?
That's the kitchen, yeah.
Okay, okay. And there's a dormer in the roof similar to what this is proposing on this site?
There's a small bathroom about 2 metres across. It's nothing to compare to the size and proportion of this.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Any other questions? No? Thank you, Mr. Tagg. You can take your seat. I have one other speaker today, Cathy McNally. If you'd like to confirm your name, and then you have 3 minutes.
Cathy McNally. Hello, I'm Cathy McNally. I'm speaking on behalf of the applicant, my daughter Samantha Richmond, who's just had a baby, so she couldn't be here today. I appreciate Mr. Tagg's concerns and would like to respond in concern of the impact of privacy first. After a meeting in his garden with Mr. Tagg, I agree that there was visibility from this smaller bedroom window. The others won't be able to see into his garden because of the amount of foliage in the shed and things like that. The small bedroom window he's concerned about looks predominantly out over our own garden, and as the planners have detailed following 2 site visits on our own and Mr. Tagg's property, it will have a limited view into his garden due to his own garage, shed, high beech hedge and our mature trees. The nature of the close proximity to others on Windsor Drive and the surrounding area inevitably leads to overlooking gardens to a greater or lesser degree. Therefore, we feel that Mr. Tagg's request for obscure glass in the bedroom window is unnecessary. People don't normally spend a lot of time looking out of the bedroom windows, usually at a time when people are in bed or going to bed. Being able to look out of a bedroom window is not an unreasonable request. Our builder has built 9 other dormer projects in the nearby vicinity, including Mr. Tagg's own loft conversion, and not one was required to have obscure glass in a rear bedroom window, including the Juliet balcony door on the first floor to the rear of a house on David's Drive, which overlooks numerous gardens. We've already taken steps to improve his privacy by removing a ground floor window at the side of our property that looked directly across the back of his property and lower garden. As a gesture of goodwill, we've also changed the plans to reduce the height and the size of the aforementioned smaller bedroom dormer to reduce the impact from his side window. The majority of the privacy Mr. Tagg enjoys currently is due to the dense foliage of the apple trees in our garden. That's the reason why all the subsequent houses to the left of our property can't see into his garden. I feel that what he's worried about could be addressed through the additional screening of planting on the boundary, as suggested on our last meeting with Mr. Tagg. The floor is being lowered. We are lowering the floor. We're having to put the floors actually attaching now instead of above the existing timbers. We are actually doing them to the side, so the floor is being lowered slightly. From the last meeting report, it was basically, apart from the cladding issue, which we've now changed, it was reported that in every other respect they were happy, the planners were happy with everything else.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the speaker? No? Oh, Councillor Rouse.
Can I just ask, obviously, you mentioned that you're going to lower the floor level.
Yeah.
By how much?
I think the roof is being pulled down by about 50 centimetres. I think the roof is being lowered, so we've got to go a minimum so that we still get that head height.
Okay, thank you.
But the actual room that overlooks is sort of in and smaller.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? No, thank you, Mrs. McNally.
Thank you.
Are there any questions now for the Planning Officer? Councillor Armitage, then Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. It's for Adrian, really. You mentioned that the actual plan will be a metre higher than it already is. How much higher will it be than the neighbouring property? And have you done that thing with a line showing how much it encroaches the light?
I don't know the exact detailing and the height that Councillor Armitage has mentioned, Chair. The best I can help him with would be to ask you to look at the photograph that's entitled Amenity Stroke Light in the pack, Chair, and that shows the roughly the finished floor level of the bungalow where Mr. Tagg lives. You can see the retaining wall, and then you can see the air bricks further up, so that's the finished floor level of the property as I understand it. And then if you can imagine that where you have currently the guttering, instead of having a hip on the roof, there will just be the gable then that extends up from there as per the drawing that is shown, the proposed plans, Chair. So you will have, you can see the DPC level on the plan, that's the hash line, and then if you compare that with the photograph, you'll be able to see the issue of how that will look. Just in terms of the side kitchen window, Chair specifically, excuse me, the issue that officers have taken in respect of that is a secondary window affording light to the kitchen and would otherwise have been installed as part of the works that have been undertaken to the bungalow, and there are other windows and light giving light to the kitchen, including the window that Councillor Elliott has mentioned, Chair. And therefore, as officers, we've not placed significant weight on the existence of that window and the impact of the extension on it. There's no doubt light getting to that window from the extension will be impacted, but officers have placed limited weight on that because of its, in our view, its secondary importance to affording light to the kitchen. So we've not afforded that significant weight in our considerations, but of course members will need to take a view on how much weight you afford that window and the light that it gives to the kitchen.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Elliott?
Adrian, just a quick one. We've heard the discrepancy in the heights. Were both heights taken from the datum being the DPC on both properties? Did we get the heights or the extra height from that? You know, we've heard about the 6 course of bricks or 7 course of bricks and so on, but were the levels taken from the DPCs on both properties?
In terms of our advice as officers, the height that we've taken from officers is from that point, yes.
Lovely, thank you.
Any other questions or comments for the officers? No? Thank you. I'll open the floor for debate. No? Okay, I'll open the floor for a motion. I'll open the floor for a motion then. Having heard what I've heard this afternoon and seen the amended plans, I'm quite happy to approve officer's recommendation.
I'll second that, Chair.
Can I have a roll call for the vote, please?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Ruff.
4.
Councillor Rouse. 4. Councillor Ridgway.
4.
Councillor Powell. Councillor Jones.
4.
Councillor Elliott. 4. Councillor Dayton.
4.
Councillor Armitage.
4.
And Councillor Ancliffe. 4. That's 9 votes for, Chair. Carried.
Thank you. The motion has been carried. And if everyone's in favour, we'll have a 10-minute break. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, can you take your seats, please, and we will resume the meeting. Fourth application this afternoon is item 7, which is NED /214/00016/FL at Eckington. I'll hand it over to the planning members.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as mentioned, the application is to convert an existing public house and ancillary buildings to 5 apartments. Fundamentally, the application is considered by officers to comply with the Council's change of use and conversions policy in the respect that it's not considered there's any significant impact on the character and appearance of the area, nor is it considered that there are any adverse impacts on neighbouring amenity. As set out in the committee report, a fundamental policy consideration relates to the loss of community facilities. Policy SH8 of the local plan and ID5 of the emerging local plan do allow for the loss of social infrastructure facilities in circumstances where it can be demonstrated there are adequate facilities elsewhere in the vicinity of the site. In this instance, officers consider that there are adequate alternative facilities within a relatively close proximity of the application site, namely the George Inn, which is situated 200 metres away, also within the designated town centre of Eckington. Also, the Rose and Crown is located at approximately 800 metres away, and the Moss Brook, albeit slightly outside the defined settlement, is situated around 700 metres from the application site. It's considered that these public houses serve the same community and are equally accessible by sustainable modes of transport. A further consideration relates to the vitality of the town centre of Eckington. Whilst it's acknowledged that the loss of a public house will have some impact on the town centre, the NPPF clearly identifies that residential development plays an important role in ensuring the vitality of centres. Officers consider in this instance that the creation of 5 households would, in its own way, contribute to the vitality and vibrancy of Eckington town centre. From a heritage perspective, there are limited visual alterations to the existing premises, and these are considered to have a neutral impact on the conservation area and the nearby listed buildings. In addition to the main points summarised, there are no technical reasons to refuse the application. Officers therefore recommend that the application is approved, subject to the conditions detailed in the officer report to members. Moving on to the slideshow. The first slide, as with the previous applications, details the application site, highlighted in orange. You can see the site's position on the corner of Market Street and Royal Close, with a public car park to the rear. The next slide, again, as with most of the applications, is provided with a location plan with the premises and associated land edged in red. Moving on to the next slide, this is a site plan which indicates the building to be converted, the remodelled building to the rear single-storey element, and then parking and manoeuvring of vehicles within the site. The next slide is the existing elevations of the public house and the range of buildings to the rear. The following slide shows the material alterations being made to the premises, which, as you can see, are fairly limited and comprise alterations to the fenestration and also the rebuilding of those single-storey range of buildings to create an additional residential unit. Moving on to the photos, the first photo shows the junction of Royal Close and Market Street. The next photo is taken from the rear of the premises and shows the rear of the 2-storey element of the public house, and in addition the range of single-storey buildings at the rear which are earmarked for demolition and rebuilding. And the final photo shows the principal elevation of the premises taken from the corner of Market Street and Royal Close. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I shall ask for the speakers now. We only have one speaker, and that's the agent, Linda Trollope. If you'd like to take the table. If you'd like to confirm your name, and then you have 3 minutes.
I'd like to say support the officer's recommendation. I appreciate that the site is within the designated town centre of Eckington in both the adopted and publication draft local plans, and that policies do seek to resist the loss of local facilities unless there are adequate alternative facilities elsewhere and it can be demonstrated that there is no demand for such a facility in the area. Both of these tests are met in this case. As noted as noted by the officer, there are other public houses within easy reach of this site. The pub has been closed since 2018, and even before that date was barely viable. It was on sale for a year after that time and then went to auction, but there was no interest in the building. Eckington Parish Council applied to this council for the building to be listed as an asset of community value, which is a procedure where a local organisation can ask for a building to be put on a list of assets of community value, which, if the asset comes up for sale, gives them up to 6 months in which to raise capital and bid to buy the asset before it can be disposed of on the open market. That application was refused by this council as the decision taker was not satisfied that the asset had provided community value currently or in the recent past. That situation is no different now. The current applicant bought it in 2019, and immediately after this, the building was entered unlawfully and vandalised, with any items of value being removed, so further reducing the viability of the building for a public house use. In addition to local policy, national policy advice is also relevant. Recent government guidance has emphasised the advantages of residential development in town centres in promoting the vitality of the centre and increasing housing supply. This has been put into legislation by the designation of the change of use of a range of local facilities such as shops, offices, restaurants and cafes to residential use as being permitted development. And there's also been recent advice on restricting the use of Article 4 directions, which could override these permitted development rights. In conclusion, the site is in a sustainable location within the built-up area of Eckington. The lack of demand for a public house here has been shown
30 seconds remain.
By its lack of viability and the lack of interest in its sale. Currently, it is attracting vandalism and antisocial behaviour and detracting from the vitality and viability of the centre. The development has been designed to be in keeping with the character of the conservation area, all in accordance with policy.
Thank you. Are there any questions? No, thank you. You can take a seat. Are there any questions for the planning officers? Councillor Armitage?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was just for Adrian. What sort of size are these apartments? I mean, do they fit the criteria, or are they more substantial, or are they less substantial in size?
Colin may be able to add, Chair, but all the 5 apartments are proposed as 2-bedded apartments, and in terms of providing reasonable levels of accommodation, Chair, from looking at the plans, my view would be that they would provide appropriate 2-bedded accommodation for a town centre, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Councillor Elliott.
Councillor Elliott.
Adrian, this is quick, and it's only because there's so much detail on that plan I can't see it. I see the hammerhead and the turning circle for cars, but unless I'm mistaken, I can't see where the parking is for the buildings. And that might just be me being a bit blind.
I don't know if I can help with this. It is quite a busy plan. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think at this scale, it's quite difficult to fully understand it. There is parking provision for 5 cars within the existing car park and yard area. It's difficult to identify where they are, but there are parking spaces on the western edges of the site as you look at it, or I don't know if it's western actually, but basically on the left-hand side of the block plan as you look at it, and there'd be additional parking at the frontage. Highways raised no objections as a consultee, and given that it's a town centre location, it's obviously considered by, well, it is considered by officers to be accessible by sustainable modes of transport as well. So there would be a parking space for each of the units.
Yeah, I'd say it was just it's a busy slide, so I could see the turning opportunity, but I couldn't see the spaces.
Yeah.
But I see where you say, I think it's all in red virtually, isn't it?
Yeah, so to answer your question, there's a parking space for each of the units.
So one car per property?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any further questions? Comments? Councillor Powell? No? Just moving your microphone. Heads on
Getting ready for the motions, Councillor.
Well, I shall open the floor to debate, if there is any. Councillor Ridgway?
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree with this plan, and I will definitely be going with officer's recommendation. This has been standing in Eckington for a long, long time. It's been empty, and when it, as Linda Trollope has said, it's been a bone of contention for quite a long time, even when it was a pub. There was lots of violence. The police tried to work with the landlords of the pub, and they weren't successful. Even North East Derbyshire did. There were lots of problems, and to see it being used to be turned into accommodation will be really good, because otherwise it's just standing there being derelict. So I will actually be going with officer's recommendation on this.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? No? Well, I'll open the floor for a motion then.
Chair, I'll move officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Seconded. Thank you. We'll have a roll call.
Thank you. Councillor Ruff?
For.
Councillor Rouse?
For.
Councillor Ridgway?
For.
Councillor Powell?
For.
Councillor Jones?
For.
Councillor Elliott?
For.
Councillor Dayton?
For.
Councillor Armitage?
For.
And Councillor Ancliffe?
For.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. The motion's been carried. We'll move on to the next application, and this is NED/21/00139/FL Morton. I'll hand over to the planning officer.
Thank you, Chair. May I firstly confirm that no late reps have been received on this application. In terms of detailing, this is a full application for the demolition of an existing single-storey outbuilding and the erection of a detached dwelling with associated garden and parking at 2 Stretton Road, Morton. Members of Planning Committee attended a virtual site visit where we saw a number of photos of the site. May I draw members' attention to point 2.7 of the report, which makes reference to the walling material as natural coarse stone. This is incorrect. The material will in fact be natural blend brick. A key update for members is that the applicant has commenced works on site and the dwelling is almost complete. Irrespective of the state of the building, there is no reason why the application cannot be determined this afternoon. Officers consider that the proposal would be in keeping with the character and appearance of the site and surrounding street scene. There would be no detrimental impact upon neighbouring properties, amenity, conservation area or highway safety. Matters relating to ecology, drainage and ground stability can be addressed through conditions. As you can see in the pack, Chair, the plan illustrates the site shaded in orange. The site is located to the north of Stretton Road and falls within both the Morton Conservation Area and Settlement Development Limit. This next slide shows the proposed block plan. The dwelling would be sited on the footprint of the outbuilding and the detached garage sited within the northwest corner of the site. Access would be taken via the existing access point off Stretton Road. This next slide is an elevation and floor plan of the proposed 2-storey 4-bedroom detached dwelling. On the next slide here we have an elevation and floor plan of the garage. The next few slides are key photos taken from the committee site visit which members attended yesterday. I've included these as a refresher for members. That concludes the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. There are no speakers on this application at all, so I'll go straight to questions for Planning Officer. Councillor Armitage.
Yes, as you said, this building is now complete, just about. So why didn't we have the photograph of the completed building instead of the shell of the building to be demolished? I mean, we could have got some well, some idea of the size and the scale of it. And I was a bit, well, at a loss really, because we didn't have the photograph of the building, and it's also down as not as a retrospective one, which it obviously is, and you know, I just feel a lot of the information is missing from the actual plan which was being shown here. And you know, I don't know, I mean, I would have liked to have seen the proper picture so we could have had a look on whether or not it's you know, the impact on the Grade 2 listed Holy Cross Church and this sort of thing, because it is quite a tall building, this new one, because I saw it yesterday. And you know, I'm sorry, but I find it lacking the information, the photographic information which would be given, and it does appear to be inaccurate when the building is standing. And it is a retrospective.
Sorry, Chair, if I can just come back to Councillor Armitage initially on some of those points, and then if Emily's got anything to add, I'm sure she will. But in terms of the application before you, Chair, it's an application to erect a two-storey property, and that doesn't alter whether the building's partly constructed, fully constructed or not constructed at all. That's still the issue that members need to take into account. The photos that we've included in the pack, Chair, are those of officers when we visited the site, and I acknowledge entirely what Councillor Armitage said, that the site has changed since then. Indeed, the building, to my mind, when I viewed it late yesterday afternoon, when it had been brought to our attention, is almost complete. It's always regrettable, Chair. We would prefer development to seek consent and get consent appropriately and then be built as such, but the fact that the building may be there is regrettable, but isn't the turning point that you should be considering. You need still to consider the planning issues, and the impact on nearby heritage assets, as Councillor Armitage has said, is one of those issues, and the comments of officers are set out in the report, Chair. So from an officer point of view, we've sought to put in the pack information to help members. The fact that the photographs were taken on the officer site visit and things have changed on site since then is not, in my view, Chair, something that should be criticised of officers. We've sought to provide the information that members need to make the decision. And of course, the plans on slide 3 of the presentation that Emily's just gone through do actually show the building as a faithful reproduction of actually what is being constructed on site, Chair.
Thank you. Emily, do you want to add to anything?
Could I come back to you on that?
I'm just going to ask Emily if she wants to add to that.
No, I think Adrian's covered everything.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Armitage.
Is the application retrospective or not? That's what I'm trying to get at, considering the building's there.
I think from that point of view, Chair, the applicant is seeking to retain what's been built and complete it. So from that point of view, development has started. However, you can't say anything different, Chair. The building is to my viewing, almost complete, certainly as the shell on site. So the applicant is seeking to retain what's been built, but ultimately what Planning Committee need to consider this afternoon is whether the erection of a two-storey property in the position of the design shown in the drawings is acceptable. If it is, Chair, you should be granting permission, potentially subject to conditions. If it's not, then you would need to consider it and refuse the application for sound planning reasons. The fact it's there is always regrettable, but that doesn't and shouldn't count against the application in the weight that you attribute to the various planning issues.
Thank you. I actually flagged this up yesterday with the officers because of information I'd received, and whilst I'm not happy that the building has already commenced, I have taken legal advice from our legal team, and we actually just judged this application as it stands. Can't go back to it as being retrospective, but we judge it as it is put before us today. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Ridgway?
I find that quite difficult because, as Councillor Armitage says, we're looking at pictures of it before it's even erected. And in my eyes, this is a retrospective planning, consideration that we have to make. And I wholeheartedly disagree with retrospective ones. If they can't abide by the law, then I think they should be made to knock it down, come back, and go through the proper channels. That's my own personal opinion. But I think it is wrong that we've been given all these pictures and the building is up and running, and it is, as far as I'm concerned, retrospective.
Thank you. Any other? Councillor Elliott?
Chair, it's just a comment really, and it is just to say that retrospective isn't against the law. They're just taking it in their own hands, whether or not we say you're taking it down or not. So they've not done anything wrong in that respect. Retrospective's not something we have to worry about unless they've got no permission at all.
Just if I can add to that, Chair, because I can only reaffirm what Councillor Elliott said, Chair, that the planning issues remain. Do you consider what's proposed on this site acceptable or not in planning terms? If you do, you should grant it permission, as I say, potentially with conditions. If you don't, for planning reasons, then you should refuse it. But what you shouldn't weigh in the balance is the fact that, for all intents and purposes, at the very least, the shell is almost complete. That doesn't fall within your consideration. You need, as Councillor Elliott's rightly said, Chair, you need to concentrate on the planning issues, which are the same whether it's been built or whether it's not been built.
Thank you. Any other comment? Question? Councillor Elliott?
Chair, Adrian, can I just ask you, that's twice now you've said leave the condition, worry about the conditions. What conditions are you actually alluding to there, please?
The officers have recommended various conditions set out at page 86 of your pack, as we normally do, and if members are minded to grant permission, we would recommend that those conditions are attached. But of course, conditions, the imposition of them is a matter for the decision maker, so that falls to the planning committee this afternoon. But our recommendation is to grant consent subject to those conditions.
We'll not worry about number one then.
That's a fair point, Councillor Elliott, yes.
Adrian, it's not fit for purpose yet. It's not fit for people to live in it yet, is it?
As I say, Chair, further to your correspondence with officers yesterday, I did go past the site myself late on yesterday afternoon. No, you wouldn't live in it as it stands, right. But the shell is pretty much complete. But just to, I don't want to labour the point, Chair, but I'll make this final point that as officers we've sought to include in the pack information that we believed was appropriate in helping members to make the decision. We weren't aware that the building works were of the state that they were, so we've not sought in any way to underplay that, nor to include information that we knew was incorrect.
Okay, thank you. If there's no further questions, I'll open the floor for debate and comment. Councillor Elliott?
I'm not going to go for the debate, Chair.
If you want to go straight to a motion, that's fine by me.
Chair, I think we've deliberated with it long enough, and I accept what our officers are telling us. So I'd like to move we go with officer recommendation, please.
I'll second that. Oh, Councillor Powell. Sorry.
If we are debating, I would just say that it's another case where we've been backed into a corner, I think. I think it is very regrettable that it's been started, but in planning terms, we have no choice. No. And we've got to respect what we have to do. So I will second it if you haven't already.
It's fine, thank you. Okay, so we've got a proposer and a seconder. I'll go for the vote.
Thank you. Councillor Ruff.
For.
Councillor Rouse.
For.
Councillor Ridgway.
I'm abstaining.
Councillor Powell.
For.
Councillor Jones.
Abstain.
Councillor Elliott.
For.
Councillor Dayton.
For.
Councillor Armitage.
Abstain.
Councillor Ancliffe.
For.
Chair, that's 6 votes for, 0 against, 3 abstentions. It's carried.
Thank you. The motion's carried. For the last item on our agenda today is the planning committee is TPO for Clay Lane.
Chair, thank you. Yes, as we discussed, I think a couple of committees ago, Where provisional tree preservation orders have been made and objections have been received to their confirmation, it's a matter for Planning Committee to consider whether to confirm the order as made, modify it and confirm it in a modified form, or to not confirm the order, Chair. And that this is a report to that respect. And in this instance, Chair, 2 area TPOs were made on trees on a site granted planning permission in early 2021, and they comprise the areas A1 and A2 on page 90 of your packs. And fundamentally, Chair, further to the comments of the Parish Council, officers are recommending that instead of area A2 incorporating a small area outside the development site, Chair, that the boundary is redrawn along the site boundary with a footpath, and that therefore that we hope as officers that addresses the Parish Council's concern about any suggestion that trees outside the area and within the Parish Council owned allotment gardens are covered by the order. It's not normal procedure, Chair, for the Council to make TPOs on trees that are owned or managed by what would be known as an appropriate authority, so ourselves, the County Council, Parish Councils, etc. So that's the officer recommendation, Chair. And just to seek to provide some background for members, got some pictures of the trees in the pack, and the first slide shows the trees subject of area A1 beyond where the bricks are currently stored. And similarly in slide 2, beyond where the cabin is stored, the trees along the Pressbrook are included in the order. Moving on to slide 3, that's now a slide looking up Clay Lane towards area A2. Slide 4 is looking back across the site towards the trees comprising area A1 adjoining Pressbrook, and you can just make out beyond, Chair, dwellings that occupy land off Windermere Road. Coming through to the next slide, there's a public footpath that the Parish Council allude to, and which divides the allotment gardens and the development site, and slide 5 shows that footpath looking back south towards trees comprising area A2 with the development site on the right hand side there. Next slide is similarly of a view of the site from that footpath, but now looking towards the trees comprising area A1, which are the trees in the background. And then finally, Chair, the final 2 slides. Again, another one looking from the footpath through area A2 towards the trees in the background, which comprise area A1. And the final slide, Chair, exemplifies the points made by the Parish Council. That is the line of the public footpath, the area beyond the Harris fencing, the trees comprised in area A2, which would still be covered by the order. The trees on the right-hand side are trees located in or around the allotment gardens that the Parish Council is seeking clarification that they don't form part of the order, and hence the officer recommendation to confirm the order in its modified form. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We have 2 speakers on this application, and I do thank you for your forbearance and patience. And the first name I have is Mr. Richard Bark. If you'd like to confirm your name, and then you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, Richard Barge. Right. In relation to area A1 on the tree preservation order, my property backs on to that particular tree row. We are approximately currently about 5 metres lower than the proposed development site. Now, there's also a requirement within the development to raise that site at least 0.65 or a metre. So I've got a big issue with privacy. Now, these trees afford us some degree of privacy from that side of the river. And also in that area, there's a proposed car turning circle, which will then see headlights at night overlooking my property and others, which again is an issue. The other issues I've got with this is basically these trees line the bank and are mostly down the bank, so there's no necessity to remove them anyway because they're not impacting on the the disputed border, because it has been stated by Derbyshire Wildlife Trust that this 10 metres wildlife corridor should be left. Now, the developers, within a Zoom meeting with the residents, saying they could come as far onto the river bank as they want, and there's issues there with otters. There should be otter mitigation strategy in what's not happened, and also water voles. Way I'm looking at it is the only reason they want to remove these trees is for liabilities and avoid maintenance costs going forward. Now, currently, looking from my rear garden recently, as last Friday evening, there's a bat feeding zone within these trees. You can sit and watch the bats going round. There's all sorts of wildlife been displaced from the orchard, what were removed in January of this year, for no good reason. So currently that's supporting a large wildlife habitat. And in relation to what government advises in bat feeding areas, this activity will removing commuting habitats, hedgerows against watercourses and woodland will obviously impact bats, which as we are aware is a protected species, and changing or removing bat foraging areas, which again basically
30 seconds remain.
Right. And basically, as we all know, trees capture carbon and give off oxygen. We bang on about people removing deforestation. Now, obviously, this is on a much smaller scale, but there's just no need for these trees to be removed when they're doing a brilliant job what they're designed to do, and basically, for no good reason, these trees are being removed. So that's why we feel so passionately about it. So hopefully we'll be supported and keep the trees where they belong. Thank you.
If you wait there in case there's any questions.
Yeah, okay.
Are there any questions? Councillor Ridgway?
Yeah, I was reading in the pack here, it says that some of the trees have already been felled. Is that right?
That's correct. In particular, in Zone A1, for some reason, there's been a hawthorn bush removed. Now, this has been reported back to council, and there was some sort of excuse that it didn't fall within that, in the tree protection order, but it was part of that hedgerow, and one of them was removed probably 6-8 weeks ago, something like that, after this tree preservation order was in force. The developer took them on himself. I was privy to a conversation between the site manager and the hired ecologist in relation to what trees they were going to remove. That's another issue because the discharging surface water into the Press Brook. Now there's spaces in that hedgerow where they could have done that quite easily without removing any trees, but they've chosen otherwise and just using any sorts of excuses. Now we've seen what's happened in Germany and Belgium this week in relation to what's now classing as soil sealing and what impact that's having. And that's been widely reported in the press over the last week or so. So yeah, so yes, that has been already reached. To answer your question.
Any other questions? No, thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Richard Eden. If you'd just like to confirm your name, and then you have 3 minutes.
Richard Eden. Right, so basically, I'll go back to what Mr. Barges said there. Derbyshire Wildlife Trust had already made an agreement with the developer on what they could remove and what they couldn't remove. The developer did say that they were going to enhance the orchard, what was already there, but the developer has already removed all of the fruit trees totally. Now, they have actually been in touch with planning, Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, and stated that it's not acceptable what they've already moved. Now, the buffer zone in A1, the wildlife buffer zone, which has got the otters, the voles, the kingfishers and what have you, they have now put another revised planning application in, and they've drawn their buffer zone up from within our boundaries. Our boundary actually goes into 3/4 of Pressbrook, and they've actually done that. Now, that means they're going to take some of these trees out on the tree preservation order on A1, which we've said is not acceptable. Since they've felled the orchard, a lot of the wildlife has come into those trees because they've got nowhere else to go. If they start removing them trees on that bank side, they was put in the 80s by the residents of Windermere Road, asked for them to be put in. The council put them in for prevention of flood, so the trees could drink the water and prevent the flood risk. Now they're wanting to remove those trees, and obviously they've been there 40 years and it's built a wildlife zone up there for wildlife. If they start removing them out of the bank, it's going to affect the otters. They've said there's got to be 10 metres from the top of the bank on their side for the otters, and they're coming in within that. Now, also, you can imagine ripping roots up. There's kingfishers that nest in the banks and everything. Obviously, there's the privacy as well and security. Like, the development's going to be 4 metres higher than our buildings, and we're going to be like in a goldfish bowl. They're going to be looking down on us. We need that. That, previous to that development starting, that was our security. There was no way into our back boundaries, but by that development now, that's opened all that area up. So without those trees as well, that gives speculation for criminals to come onto our back gardens. That's about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? No, thank you very much. I'll now move for any questions to the planning officers. Councillor Elliott.
Adrian, I don't suppose it's as much a question as a statement, really. I remember this application going through, and I can't say it any better than the two speakers have said it, but we, I'm fairly confident, said that all those trees on the periphery of that development must stay, not only for the privacy reasons, but to sustain the bank, and as these have rightly said, to stop the bank falling in times of flood, because it was only a narrow brook. And I seem to remember the agent saying at some point that they were going to scrape the brook out so as it would actually take the water and the flood risk away. But the trees, for me, imperative this day. So it wasn't so much of a question, Adrian, I apologise. I can make it one if you want.
I'll forgive you. Anyone else? Councillor Rouse?
Obviously, Mr Barge and Mr Eden reverted to the bats. Do we know, I mean, in modern houses these days, they actually, in the brickwork, they actually do bat houses within the brickwork. Do we know if that's going to happen?
Without having the permission and the conditions here, Chair, I'm afraid I don't know. If there's, I'd have to check the conditions in terms of what is required for ecology, but I can advise Councillor Rouse further to this meeting if you'd like me to, Chair.
Yeah, that'd be lovely.
That's the only way I could answer the question, but I'll write to you and let you know about that.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Councillor Rancliffe?
Adrian, this might sound rather silly, but if they've taken trees out or hedgerow, should they not be made to put back?
The issue that was mentioned in relation to the tree by the speakers, the information that I have is that my colleague, the enforcement officer, did go and investigate that issue with the developers, and his view was that for whatever reason it wasn't a tree that was covered by the order. Now, that's coming to me from discussing that with the site owner. But other than that, if trees are removed, then yes, that would be, if contrary to a TPO, then that would be an offence that the council could prosecute should it choose to do so. The issue about an area order is it will only be sufficient in the relatively short term to protect the trees, because they should be reviewed and revised within a relatively short period of time, because the area TPOs are only protective of trees in place at the time the order is made. So within a relatively short period of time, we will need to go and resurvey the trees and put them in a modified order, groups or single trees or woodland trees. But in short, Chair, if trees are removed that are otherwise protected, the council can prosecute the removal of those trees if it chooses to do so.
But they could give them the chance to actually place something back in its place?
That is the other alternative, yes. And that may be part of the mitigation mediation that takes place if trees are removed.
Councillor Jones?
Yeah, I was going to put the same point, really. And I want to know what sanctions can be taken, because if we let people demolish the trees willy-nilly when we've already got an order, it's just not on. And I wonder what we can do about it, because we may have to make an example of this, because it's not just happening on this site. And we're looking for things like, we're supposed to respect the birds nesting. They don't respect that. The trees go. And I'm quite worried about it. And with global warming, you know, we made a commitment to that in this district council, that we take it seriously. And chopping trees down that are not in the way of actually the structures that's going up on a bank, are just totally against them being removed.
Chair, just to comment on that, just to clarify to members that the report before you this afternoon is seeking a view from members on whether you wish to confirm or not the order. So in terms of this report, Chair, the issue for members is relatively straightforward, yay or nay, and officers are recommending that it is in that slightly modified form in respect of the comments that the Parish Council has made. I note the comments that members are making here. The purpose of this order is to ensure that further trees from this site aren't removed, and what has been said is true, that a number of trees have been removed from the site, but not trees that were protected at that time. So as far as officers are concerned, there's been no offence so far, but if further trees were removed, should members confirm the order this afternoon, then yes, if they were removed, then an offence has been undertaken, and it is for the council then to decide whether to prosecute. But all those elements that members are making here, ecology, you've heard about amenity, they're all issues that you can take into account in your decision this afternoon.
Thank you. Are there any? Councillor Armitage?
Thank you, Chair. I saw this site in April. The orchard had been ripped out. It was put into a big heap and set on fire, and this was after the end of March time when birds were nesting. As far as I'm concerned, this tree preservation order should be upheld, and also the other one as well. And if any trees were taken out, whether they were covered by this or not, then I know it's not a planning matter, but I feel that they should be prosecuted, because it was basically, I've never seen such a mess, and the people on Windermere Road had to stand by, and not only that, I feel they had their nose rubbed in it because they lit the fires, and the fires were smouldering for days, and I had to call environmental health along to sort it out. And I think I will be voting to extend this tree preservation order.
Thank you. We've had lots of comments, so do I need to open the floor for debate or move straight to a motion? Councillor Armitage?
Yeah, I go along with officer's recommendation.
And I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you. Have a vote, please.
Chair, can we say that through the motions that we make sure the conditions are on, that they put trees back that are moved or got rid of?
Certainly.
Because that's what I want to see, and I don't mean a sapling back with a piece of wooden,
mature.
Of chew, but I want to see mature trees put back. That's what they've demolished.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's a full management order put on for the whole of these trees.
Okay.
Can I second that, Chair? I wholeheartedly agree. I've voiced my concerns before in this planning committee about trees being chopped down willy-nilly. I think every planning application, as far as I'm concerned, that comes along with trees on, those trees should be protected, because they were here long before we and they'll be here a lot longer than some of these houses that will be being built. But yes, and I also think that we should be asking that the hedge that has been taken out, that something else is replaced, put back in that place as well. Because as far as I'm concerned, a hedge or a tree, they're the same thing.
Thank you. Okay,
So we just clear on that, Chair. It appears to be to approve the order in line with officer recommendations, subject to the conditions, the modifications which Adrian's referred to, and then also with a full management order for the trees, and in particular, members expressed a desire that any restoration of trees should be made with mature trees rather than saplings. Is that the essence of it, members? And is that okay by you, Adrian, in terms of your understanding?
Just in terms of that, Chair, we need to differentiate between the order itself, which is very clear. There's only certain things that we can impose in relation to a tree preservation order that protects the trees. What we can't do is demand that they are managed in a particular way. But what it does allow the council to have control over how any felling and replanting takes place, Chair. So we have very limited powers in respect of that, and in respect of the wider site, that would be taken up with the landscaping of the site, and without checking back the records, the landscaping scheme for the site may well already have been approved in terms of planting, hedgerow planting, etc. So again, we may not be able to row back on that.
Chair, can I ask a question? When we went back to when we originally put that site through for planning, Adrian, I've got a feeling that mention was made of the orchard and they were keeping it.
That's right.
So if they're keeping it and they've taken it out, surely we should be enforcing that anyway.
Again, Chair, without the information before me, I can't be clear on that, but those issues will have been addressed, I believe, as part of the landscaping of the site. But again, I can find that out and advise Councillor Elliott if that would help, Chair. Okay. I don't want to overstate what we can do through this resolution, Chair. All we can do in terms of the TPO is protect the trees, the subject of the order. We aren't able to go beyond that, I'm afraid, and row back on other things that may have been agreed or taken place. But if Councillor Elliott will permit me, Chair, I'll write to him with what has been agreed and where we are with the landscaping of the site.
Yep. Okay. Do you want to go through it?
So that essentially then, Chair, is to approve the order along the conditions set out in the report? Yeah?
Okay, we'll go to the vote.
Councillor Ruff.
4.
Councillor Rouse.
4.
Councillor Ridgway. Councillor Powell.
4.
Councillor Jones.
4.
Councillor Elliott.
4.
Councillor Dayton.
4.
Councillor Armitage.
4.
Councillor Ancliffe.
4.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. The motion's been passed. Thank you very much. Gentlemen, you can remove yourself after a long haul. Thank you. We're moving on to item 11, planning appeals lodged and determined.
If I can just ask members just for a few minutes just to go through some of the appeals, Chair. You'll have seen we've had a bumper crop over the past 4 weeks. There's been a number of outstanding appeals that decisions have come in relatively recently, and I hope all members are receiving the appeal decisions, Chair, because they make some interesting reading and been some interesting decisions relatively recently. I want to pick out one or two, if I may, and raise one or 2 points that I hopefully will be helpful in members making decisions on applications going forwards. The first one I just wanted to raise was the first one under appeals allowed, which is the Scout Hut at Holmesfield. In particular, Chair, in that instance, the inspector, it was interesting what the inspector came to the conclusion on in terms of very special circumstances, having taken the view that the development was inappropriate development in the green belt. The inspector placed great weight on the fact that the building was to be used by a local scout group, and he particularly tied it back to the benefits of such facilities during COVID, Chair. So a very interesting view that was taken by the inspector on that, although fundamentally he agreed with the council that it was inappropriate development, but the weight placed on those very special circumstances was different. Next one I'd like to make reference to is Mr. Gill, which is the second one on page 96. And this was a decision taken under Officer Delegated Powers, but it is for a new dwelling. Wingworth members, I'm sure, will know where the site is, but it was for a new dwelling outside settlement limits. And members may recall the consideration we had of the application at Calo last time, whereby we had similar arguments about new housing development outside settlement limits. And I would encourage members to read that decision, because although they didn't agree with officers, the decision is well reasoned and uses the reasoning that we put to members in respect of the CALO application last time round. So it makes the point that development outside settlement limits is not necessarily inappropriate and unacceptable. You need to take one step further. So I would encourage members to have a particular look at that site. The next one, Chair, is on page 97, and that's Cartilage Hall Farm, which went to an informal hearing. And again, members may recall the debate we had about that site, which is again developed in the Greenbelt, and officers took the view that, again, inappropriate development, but that was outweighed by the benefits to the conservation area. The inspector took a different view, again, inappropriate development, but he didn't feel, I believe it was a he, it may have been a she, but anyway, the inspector didn't agree that the circumstances and improvements to the buildings in the conservation area outweighed that harm. So again, another very interesting decision. The next one is the 2 appeals at Renishaw Hall. Again, members may recall the long debate about that application that we had at Planning Committee. It's some time ago now. Interestingly, that appeal was part of a 4-day informal hearing, and the inspector went into great detail about the heritage impacts on the listed buildings in the conservation area, and particularly the registered hall and garden of Renishaw Hall. It's quite a lengthy appeal decision, but again, I'd encourage members to read that and to have some understanding of the depth with which an inspector went into the various elements of that appeal. Again, a very well-reasoned decision. The next one, Chair, is Mr. Lynch, page 97, the bottom of there, which was for a very limited building within the Greenbelt, a gazebo, which the inspector dismissed, and again took the view inappropriate development in the Greenbelt, particularly conspicuous location, and didn't believe that there were very special circumstances that outweighed that. So again, if you're reading all these together, hopefully they're giving you a flavour of the issues that you need to take into account when considering applications in Greenbelt, heritage assets, etc. And finally, Chair, the 2 at the top of page 98, well, almost finally, the 2 at the top of page 98, Wessington Park and Mr. and Mrs. Bedford. Again, members will recall the detailed discussions and debate that took place in Planning Committee at both of those. The interesting thing about both of those decisions is the weight that inspectors are placing on the designation of areas of multiple environmental sensitivity in your publication draft local plan. The special landscape area designation will disappear when you adopt your new local plan, but the inspector is placing great weight on the aims as we're knowing them. So the areas of multiple environmental sensitivity, which is set out in your publication draft local plan. Again, 2 very interesting decisions that came forward. And just finally, just to conclude with Mr. Merriman, we're very pleased with the enforcement notice appeal at Borderview Farm. A number of appeals, a number of unauthorised developments, and we're very pleased that the council secured a dismissal on the most important elements of that appeal. So it's a lot of reading, Chair, but they are very interesting in terms of how inspectors are viewing decisions exactly the way that we should. Just some of them are particularly well argued and do take some reading, but well worth half an hour after Coronation Street tomorrow night, Chair, perhaps.
Does anyone still watch that?
Is it still going?
I've no idea.
I'm happy to take any questions, Chair, but hopefully that's a useful canter through those decisions.
Thank you. Any comments? No? I've no matters of urgency, so I thank you all for attending this afternoon, and a safe journey home.
Thank you.